So let's talk about one specific reason why you do an ocular POCUS, which is for the detection of increased intracranial pressure. There's a whole bunch of other reasons you do it, but we're going to focus on ICP because this is what you need to get to be confident, in my books, in fundoscopy for telling you things about increased intracranial pressure. And I think it's one of the big lies of medicine in general that we get this in non-dilated eyes, and that especially we get it in non-dilated eyes when our kids are this age, right? Like, I can't tell you about the pupils. I can't tell you about the cornea when I approach a kid who's of a developmental stage that they don't want me to approach them. They're going to squeeze their eyes shut. They're going to cry. They're going to grab their parent. So wouldn't it be nice if we had a way that you can say, I don't mind if you close your eye. I can still assess what I want to assess for increased intracranial pressure. And sometimes people say, yeah, but you know, it's still hard. The kid moves around, and will I really be confident? And it's like requires a technical component. And I say, if vets can do it, we can do it. If you can look in the throat of that toddler who's using strong jaw muscles to clench, then I think you can put a camera on the surface of their eye and get what you want to get. And what you're trying to get is something like this. So just to orient everyone, this is the skin up here, the skin of the eyelid. We've got the anterior chamber. You can tell this eye is a little tilted. There's the iris. We've got the anterior chamber here. You can see a little back wall of the lens swims into view just briefly. You have to be hitting it at the right angle for you to see it. But the structures we're interested in are the ones back here. So this dark band that comes up centrally here, that's the optic nerve itself. And then you're going to see all this bright stuff. It's kind of homogeneous on either side, and that's retroorbital fat. And you'll see a little bit of a difference in between where you've got this area that's like these little staggered, almost reverberating areas. So that's the optic nerve sheath. Those are the arachnoid trabeculations, the sheath that surrounds the dark optic nerve in the center, and then the sheath on the outside. So you need modern equipment, you need high resolution equipment in order to really be confident about those things. And we're going to get to like the optic nerve sheath versus the optic disc and protrusion in terms of, if you don't want to be having big debates about the state of the literature on things, then you want a simple approach for like, well, but can I detect papilledema? Can I detect the same thing I would detect on fundoscopy just through the closed lids of an uncooperative patient? So can you?
Oh, yes.
Right? Like, you don't require medical training. You just require the 5 minutes we just spent talking to be able to appreciate the difference between this and the original one where it's flat. Now I can show you ones that are in between. I can show you ones where there's what we describe as a blip, a tiny little elevation, and those are the tricky ones. Like, when does this truly convince you that it's papilledema? This is an example that for me is truly convincing of papilledema, and we'll get into why with the rest of the talk. So terms that I might use or that you might encounter in this that all mean slightly different things. Sonographic papilledema and optic disc elevation are things that kind of go together. Increased optic nerve sheath diameter, and then a term that I've invented that I want to like promote some more, ampulla edema, as opposed to papilledema. And then a term that kind of includes all of these things. You want to be talking about not just the elevation of the disc, but you also want to include the optic nerve sheath diameter. You want a term that encompasses both. People have used the term optic nerve swelling as detected by point-of-care ultrasound. So in terms of how to do this, there's some technical aspects that we're going to be posting soon with another one of our how-to videos that David Neeson has done an amazing job of producing. And my daughter Tilly is a superstar in, and Kate Fathi, one of our POCUS faculty, they do this excellent job of teaching you how to do this scan. And I won't spend a ton of time teaching you how, because that resource is out there. But essentially, you want to put a tegaderm over the eye so that gel doesn't get into it. You don't have to worry about infection control issues. And then you want to scan without putting too much pressure. And you want to produce a sweep that gets you a view like I showed you. The best kind of views are the one where the nerve runs straight up and down in the screen rather than being tilted like this, because there are some effects that a globe that's tilting a lot will have in terms of both protrusion of the optic disc into the screen or into the globe, and also what it can potentially do to the diameter of the optic nerve sheath. So getting that view that I showed you guys in the first two, where it's like the nerve is running perfectly up and you're really confident about the borders of the sheath, is harder than just blocking the probe on. But being confident about papilledema is a lot easier. And we want to be using a linear probe, something with the kind of high resolution to allow you to be confident about measurements you're making at the back of the eye. We generally don't use the L25. We have that on one of our machines. We find that it's actually too high frequency, and even going through the globe, you're just going through fluid. So you'd think, okay, I'm not burning out my beam. I'm going to have good resolution when I get to the back of the eye. But the material within the globe, even though it's mostly just fluid, still burns out a lot of the beam. That if you're trying to get a high resolution image of retroorbital structures like the optic nerve sheath, you'll find comparing the two, everyone gravitates towards using the L14. An L20 beam, a 20 megahertz beam, is burnt out by the time it gets to the retroorbital space. The other thing to keep in mind in terms of frequency, so the higher your frequency, the more you're vibrating molecules right next to each other. And so the more resolution you're getting, but also that molecule that then vibrates this molecule vibrates this one, instead of like this one moves and moves this one, the low frequency kind of deeper penetration approach. A lot of that high energy gets turned into heat. Heat is not necessarily a great thing for the retina. There's a theoretical risk of causing thermal damage to a retina that is not a practical risk if you take a few supernormal precautions. So you use an ocular preset. You see this setting here, the thermal index. These are ways in which the machine can change the output coming from the probe to minimize things like the thermal effect that it's generating. So our ocular presets have a very low mechanical index and a very low thermal index that negates that risk of any retinal damage. And even then, if you weren't using it with one of these presets, it's not, oh my God, you put the probe on the eye on a thyroid preset. That patient's not going to have thermal damage to their retina unless you left it there for an hour or more. But we don't want people using things that can see that theoretical risk. So please, every time you're scanning an eye, use the ocular preset to protect the patient from that very small theoretical risk.